welcome to what they really said. You are dropping into a deeply candid and often shocking conversation between two of the biggest forces in modern cinema, Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio. They've pulled back the curtain, not just on their biggest roles, but on the vulnerability and often the just absurd chaos that seems to define life in Hollywood.
That's exactly right. And this isn't your typical, polished press tour junket. This deep dive is built entirely from the transcript of their actors-on-actors exchange.
Yeah.
And what we found is, well, it's a source document that's rich with surprisingly human facts and these rare insights into the creative struggle.
Oh, absolutely. We are getting a real look inside the process. I mean, the high-stakes decisions, the technical hurdles, and sometimes just the embarrassing screw-ups.
It's the stuff that usually stays behind the scenes. We're
Yeah.
talking about everything from working with legendary, sometimes, infamously difficult directors like Paul Thomas Anderson.
QTA.
Yeah, PTA and Lynn Ramsey, to surviving the truly wild absurdity of, early career auditions.
And on-set chemical mishaps, which we will definitely get to. This is a level of detail that, like you said, usually stays locked away in private production diaries.
So our mission today is really to extract those key nuggets that reveal the vulnerability, the surprising humor, and I think most importantly, the sheer effort involved in making these films.
Yeah.
We're basically offering you a shortcut to understanding the minds behind the blockbusters and why their commitment to craft is, well, it's often intertwined with just absolute chaos.
We're not just summarizing their films, we're going deep into the personal stories that informed those projects. We'll cover the intense creation of a modern revolutionary character, the almost impossible challenge of adapting pure inner poetry,
The drama of working with those tough, visionary directors.
and the unbelievable scandals like drugs somehow ending up in the clam chowder.
I still can't get over that one. And several memorable ambient mix-ups. That kind of granular detail, it rarely makes it to the public sphere, but it really illuminates the critical human element of high-level filmmaking.
It does. It shows that the creative process, even when it's being executed by the best in the world, is often just as messy and unscripted as life itself. That sounds like a journey we need to take. Okay, let's unpack this and start with Leo's work on One Battle After Another and the profound deconstruction of the anti-hero revolutionary Bob.
It's a compelling starting point because Lawrence, she immediately recognized something personal in DiCaprio's portrayal of Bob. She noted how raw and warm the performance was, and that led them directly into a conversation connecting the character to DiCaprio's own, counterculture upbringing.
And this detail is huge because it shifts the entire context of the film. DiCaprio clarifies that the project was incredibly personal for Paul Thomas Anderson, the director. He reveals that PTA had been writing the film, One Battle After Another, for a stunning, what was it?
15 to 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Think about that kind of gestation period. It means the film wasn't some quick commercial exercise.
Yeah.
It was a deeply ingrained idea about generational conflict and failure, which makes it incredibly topical even now.
Right. And the film focuses on this hardcore revolutionary, Bob, who's trying to assimilate into a modern world while dealing with a daughter he barely understands.
And that theme had been permeating PTA's mind for 2 decades.
So the personal connection for DiCaprio is fascinatingly specific. He confirms his parents were, in his words, definitely hippies. And he even reveals his father was involved with counterculture legends like Abby Hoffman back in the day.
Right. But he's really quick to make a critical distinction for Bob's character in the film.
What was that?
Well, Bob wasn't just some nostalgic hippie. While he drew on similar anti-establishment values to DiCaprio's dad, the character in the film was part of a much more radical extremist strain. He was a hardcore revolutionary who engaged in much crazier stuff than just, dropping out.
And this leads to an almost shocking revelation that grounds the film in real specific history. DiCaprio mentions that the film was based specifically on the infamous Weather Underground movement and the nonfiction book Days of Rage.
Yes, and he explains the character was inspired by a particular bomb maker from that context.
And then quite casually, he just layers in this deeply intimate detail.
That his own father was also a bomb maker.
Which, we need to pause on that. That requires some immediate context for you listening, because in that era, a bomb maker within the radical counterculture meant someone involved in building explosive devices, often for political purposes, whether that meant, structural attacks or symbolic acts of violence against the establishment.
It's a heavy piece of information. And that single piece of information, that familial and historical link to revolutionary violence, it gives Bob this undeniable foundational authenticity, even if the film treats him humorously.
Exactly. It explains why Lawrence felt the performance was so raw and so close to DiCaprio's own persona. He was channeling a very specific, historically documented, and deeply personal slice of American counterculture violence and idealism.
It's immersion, but not just into history. It's immersion into a lineage of radical thought. But what makes PTA genius, as you said, is the way he takes this immense historical and emotional weight and then just completely undercuts it with comedy.
It's the intentional subversion of the failed hero, which is so, so effective. You come in expecting this gritty drama about a man trying to reignite the revolution.
And what you get is a comedy about his absolute situational incompetence.
Yeah, the sources confirm that the humorous circumstances totally dominate the story. Bibe expects to easily use all his skills honed from his past as a revolutionary operative, but the reality is...
He's too stoned to get off the couch.
Right, and the central conflict, the thing that stalls the entire plot, is that he can't remember his password.
It's the tragedy of a man whose analog past is utterly useless in a digital age.
And they intentionally just kneecapped every potential moment of heroism. Lawrence reminds him of the scene where he just falls off the roof.
And DiCaprio confirms this anti-hero trajectory was a deliberate choice held all the way through post-production. Even in the final moments of the movie, they were still considering giving him a heroic redemption, a big payoff. But PTA ultimately decided, nah, he doesn't do it. The film commits entirely to the idea of failure.
And that commitment is what Lawrence recognized as the key performance principle here. It's something we can call the Alec Baldwin principle. She observes that the funniest people are those who commit to the joke as serious as a heart attack.
Yes.
If you, as the actor, are winking at the camera or you're aware that you're being funny, it breaks the reality and the joke just doesn't land.
That observation is so crucial for comedic timing, especially in a dark comedy like this one. DiCaprio's success as Bob wasn't based on delivering punchlines. It was based on his absolute, dramatic commitment to the character's profound situational failure.
He believes he's a world-class revolutionary.
And the audience laughs at the disconnect between his inflated identity and his pathetic inability to execute simple modern tasks. That serious commitment is what sells the humor.
And speaking of execution, let's talk about creative collaboration and technical hurdles, because the production of this film sounded like beautiful chaos, specifically regarding the late-stage casting of Benicio del Toro.
Oh, it was a massive, expensive disruption. Del Toro's casting forced a total production shutdown for 3 months, just so they could wait for him to become available.
That's a huge gamble for a major studio project.
A huge gamble. But the sources reveal that his arrival profoundly changed the movie for the better. It fundamentally shifted the narrative's direction.
Why? What was it about him?
Well, because he didn't just walk onto the set ready to deliver lines. He arrived knowing his character, the dynamics, the motivations, better than the script did. He immediately started leading the team to improvise most of their scenes together.
So he just kind of took over.
In a way, yeah. DiCaprio details how Benicio would essentially veto planned action based on his character's inner logic. He'd say things like, no, I'm not doing this. I am doing this. This is who's sensei. No, this is what he...
Yeah.
The directors and writers trusted his instincts so completely that they basically rewrote the entire film as they went, particularly all the road trip material.
That gives us such a rare, high-stakes insight into how collaboration works at the highest level. You have a script that's been 15 years in the making, and one actor, by sheer force of intuition and preparation, is allowed to just trump the original intent and improvise the core dynamic of the film.
It really underscores the value of having the right person in the role, even if it requires pausing the entire multi-million-dollar production.
And if that creative chaos wasn't enough, they layered on a technical hurdle that seems almost, I don't know, masochistic in the modern era.
This Division camera.
Yeah, they shot the entire film on these extremely rare VistaVision film cameras.
Okay, so we need to slow down and really explain why this matters. VistaVision is a highly specialized vintage format.
It is. DiCaprio confirms the cameras are almost endangered or extinct. A lot of them came from the classic Alfred Hitchcock era, and the format was last used prominently back in the 1950s for films like One-Eye Jack.
And the complexity comes from the orientation, right?
Yeah.
Normal film runs vertically through the camera. Exactly. VistaVision runs the film horizontally, so the image goes the long way across the camera gate. This uses about 3 times the surface area of a standard 35mm frame.
And the consequence of that much larger surface area is a higher fidelity, crisper, more cinematic image, which is obviously why PTA chose it. But The trade-off is this massive logistical difficulty.
It is. And DiCaprio drops this great detail that fellow actor Giovanni Ribisi actually helped source two of these incredibly rare, highly specific cameras for the production.
That's amazing.
But the truly massive operational consequence of using this vintage format is that there was no playback available during filming.
No playback.
None. In the digital era, actors immediately see a monitor replay to check their performance, continuity, focus, whatever. With VistaVision, they couldn't.
The psychological impact of that cannot be overstated. It mandated this extraordinary level of trust between PTA and the actors, and between the actors and their own instincts.
Completely. They had to rely on the rollouts, which means physically stopping and checking the film after a sequence. It's a high-stakes, time-consuming way of shooting.
It creates a raw energy, though. I can see that. Knowing you can't check means you have to be completely present and committed to the moment, because you won't know if you nailed it until later, maybe even days later.
It forces the spontaneity we see in the final product.
And of course, in all this chaos, there was some collateral damage. DiCaprio casually mentions that they only destroyed one camera during the shoot.
Yeah, while filming the high-intensity driving truck sequences. You have to wonder what the insurance premium was on those vintage machines.
I can't even imagine. It's a verifiable risk taken in the pursuit of authenticity. And that authenticity extended far beyond the technical. PTA, we learned, spent about a year just on location scouting, which the director considered foundational to the story.
This commitment to location and local community input really shapes the entire narrative. They filmed in Northern California, Borrego Springs for those amazing desert road sequences, and El Paso. And they actively sought out and used non-actors who had the vocations represented in the film, which just grounds the story in reality.
And that location focus brings us back to Bob's specific archetype, which DiCaprio developed following a key directorial note from PTA. Make the character personal and a California kind of guy.
And that leads to this truly specific and fascinating character concept he calls the hipnex.
Yes, we need to unpack that term. What is a hipneck?
So the hipnex is a blend of seemingly contradictory archetypes specific to certain areas of Northern California. You're mixing hippies, the long-haired counterculture, anti-establishment, environmentally conscious types, with the don't tread on me, anti-government, rural self-sufficiency types.
So they are anti-establishment, but not necessarily like progressive or liberal. They're the people who believe in deep personal freedom, who might keep a shotgun in the backyard, ready to get people out of their face, whether those people are government agents or commercial developers.
That's it exactly. It makes Bob a hyper-specific, regional product of anti-establishment sentiment, rather than just a general revolutionary figure we might have seen in a lesser film. This detail, this hipneck philosophy, allows Bob's revolutionary ethos to make perfect sense in a contemporary, rural American context.
You can just see how PTA's direction demanding the character be personal to the guys DiCaprio knew growing up, combined with that commitment to authentic locales and specific counterculture history. It led directly to the raw, layered performance Lawrence admired.
It all connects.
Okay, that wraps up our deconstruction of the political and technical chaos in Leo's film. Let's pivot now to Lawrence's deeply personal challenge, adapting the indescribable inner life in her film, Die My Love.
We pivot completely now, yeah. Moving from political external chaos to internal emotional chaos.
Yeah.
And the origin story of this project is just as surprising as the PTA revelation. It involves a very high-profile recommendation.
Yes, the unlikely origin is that Martin Scorsese, of all people, read the book Die My Love by Ariana Harwicks in his personal book club. And he then suggested directly to Lawrence, you should be in this movie or you should make this into a movie and star in it.
I mean, that is an endorsement you simply cannot ignore.
You can't.
It sets the bar incredibly high. But the source material itself presented a massive, seemingly insurmountable creative dilemma.
The novel was almost entirely composed of the main character's inner monologue. It was pure stream of consciousness, inner dialogue.
Right. And Lawrence readily admits she initially couldn't crack how to make it a movie. She feared having to go back to Marty and admitting she just didn't get how to translate it to the screen.
I mean, how do you film someone's thoughts for 90 minutes? It's impossible. The book was trying to describe the indescribable states of being, like grave depression, extreme anxiety, and a complete identity crisis. And it was using intensely poetic and often abstract metaphors.
For instance, the character might feel lost, and the book describes that feeling literally as being lost in a dense forest. It was an internal, poetic narrative, not a conventional plot structure.
So the crucial realization that saved the project was the understanding that the adaptation couldn't be literal at all. It required a director with a poet's touch, which clicked when Lynn Ramsay became involved.
And Ramsey is the perfect choice, known for her unique poetic sensibility and visual grammar. She treats narrative as visual poetry, rather than a literal linear story that needs to be followed beat for beat. This shift in mindset from prose to poetry was the key to unlocking the story's emotional complexity on screen.
That's a huge takeaway for anyone interested in the adaptation process. You realize that to translate profound internal states accurately, the filmmaker must often choose a visionary director whose style matches the tone and emotional abstraction of the source material, even if it sacrifices conventional storytelling.
Absolutely. And Ramsey also made some very smart structural changes that deepen the themes, particularly focusing on the character's isolation and the reality of postpartum life.
She made a key change that was not in the original novel. She made the couple new to the town they moved to.
Which is a subtle but powerful directorial choice. By removing the character's existing community and support network, Ramsey immediately amplified the main character's depression and isolation.
And Lawrence notes that this change reflects the crushing reality of being a new parent without a community or support system. You're completely isolated, leading to that profound existential question, what is my life now? The external world is gone, and only the demanding internal world remains.
And this helps the audience truly understand the character's profound, debilitating mental state, which Lawrence illustrates with the specific, powerful metaphor of the character pacing like a tiger in a cage.
It's such an immediate, visceral image of restlessness, entrapment, and profound unhappiness.
And they also discuss how the film deliberately subverts simple narratives around postpartum mental health in media. It's often represented so simplistically, only focusing on the mother not connecting with or actively disliking the child.
Right, and Lawrence rightly points out that this is only one version of it. The film goes much deeper, exploring other equally devastating versions, such as the complete erosion of the marriage, because the dynamic between the parents changes so radically after the arrival of the child. It focuses on the loss of self.
She highlights that feeling of becoming a useless cow who used to have an important, vibrant life.
We circle back here to DiCaprio's revolutionary theme. Lawrence connects this identity loss to the experience of a character who previously had important work, whether it was political activism or a career, and is now just subsumed by the all-consuming, unglamorous reality of new motherhood.
It's the disillusionment that follows high ideals. In DiCaprio's film, the revolution failed politically. In Lawrence's film, the revolution of self failed personally. Lawrence's character is grappling with the crisis of identity because she can't reconcile her previous important self with the animalistic, confined existence of a new mother.
Precisely. And in a film focused on tension and vulnerability, the baby itself created enormous dramatic stakes for the audience.
DiCaprio, watching the film, admits that the baby put him intensely on edge because Lawrence's mother character was so visibly unraveled and capable of anything. That uncertainty is the source of the film's powerful, unsettling tension.
Now, here's where the actor's real-life experience directly influenced the art. Lawrence notes that both she and her co-star, Rob, were parents. Wright had a newborn, and they made an intentional choice to change the script.
Right. They collectively decided they were simply not capable of playing characters who neglect or physically harm their child. This choice shifted the character's emotional breakdown. It made the focus entirely on the identity crisis, the depression, and the erosion of the marriage, rather than relying on a more simplistic, often sensationalized trope of child danger.
And the director's method, Lynn Ramsay's style for this specific film, sounds equally unconventional and trust-based as PTA's work on One Battle After Another.
It does. Lawrence describes Ramsay as being extremely hands-off once the world was built and the camera was set up. Ramsay's method was to build the world, set up the camera, and then step back, watching, observing, and letting the reality unfold.
Lawrence sums it up beautifully. Ramsay would tell her to simply exist within the scene, allowing the emotional state to come forward naturally rather than forcing a predefined action.
And Ramsay's poetic sensibility truly did elevate the script beyond its initial prose. Lawrence shares the specific example of the scene of them crawling in the grass, which was a hugely metaphorical moment in the finished film. Originally, that scene was written as the husband proposing while they were awkwardly flipping burgers.
No way.
Yes. And Ramsay changed that prosaic conventional moment into something much more abstract and poetic, crawling in the grass, suggesting an animalistic intimacy or perhaps a mutual degradation.
It showcases the director prioritizing visual poetry and metaphor over narrative conventionality. And speaking of immediate vulnerability, the anecdote about the first day of filming is a perfect example of Ramsey's throw you into the gauntlet
Oh,
approach.
yeah. The very first scene they shot together was the highly physical and intimate, naked fighting like tigers sequence.
Mhm.
Lawrence and co-star Rob barely knew each other. It's a baptism by fire that forces immediate, intense vulnerability and chemistry right out of the gate.
And Lawrence admits she actually likes that approach because it eliminated any chance for polite professional awkwardness. Total raw immersion right from the beginning, which undoubtedly contributed to the raw, visceral feeling of the final product.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's transition now from the high stakes of creation to the often humiliating realities of the work itself, specifically the work ethic, the habits, and navigating difficult collaborations.
This section is deeply relatable. I mean, it reveals that even two of the most successful actors in the world struggle with basic process, preparation, and managing their own cognitive load, just like the rest of us. It's kind of comforting to hear them admit their flaws publicly.
It really is. So, first up is DiCaprio's self assessed bad habit, which he calls the shotgun spray. He admits to shooting out an excessive volume of unnecessary ideas during production, which he feels wastes time and often steers the conversation away from the scene's obvious focus.
It sounds like a restless, relentless creative energy. But Lawrence, in a perfect show of conversational support, immediately reframes it. She argues that sometimes steering away from the obvious is exactly what is needed to unlock a better performance or reveal a hidden truth about the scene.
She uses that fantastic, pragmatic metaphor: a broken clock is right twice a day. If most of the ideas aren't useful, they move on. But if just one of those ideas is the breakthrough, it's invaluable and saves the entire scene.
So the shotgun spray might be inefficient, but it's a necessary engine for discovery. He turns his bad habit into a beneficial creative tool. Now, for Lawrence's self-assessed habit, which is the extreme switch-off.
This is her habit of being incredibly effective at letting go the moment the day wraps. She is able to transition immediately out of the emotional intensity of the role, which she notes is fantastic for her life and mental health, especially after filming something intensely emotional like Die My Love.
The trade-off, however, is the professional failure. Because she achieves such mental distance from the character, she completely fails to prepare for the next day, which leads to what she calls a mad scramble every single morning in the hair and makeup trailer.
She admits the consequence is that she ends up focusing on frantically memorizing lines right up until the camera rolls instead of delivering her best, most prepared performance. She's prioritizing the rote mechanics of the lines over the true artistry of the acting, which is the ultimate sacrifice of that habit.
It's the perpetual tension for any high-performing individual, right?
Mhm.
How do you maintain mental health and stability while still meeting the intense demands of an extremely detailed, emotionally complex job?
Yeah, she acknowledges that shutting off is a great quality that keeps her sane, but the next morning is hell because she has to play catch-up. That tension leads us naturally to the section about learning from tough coaches. Specifically, her dynamic with director David O. Russell, who she worked with repeatedly during her early career successes.
And Lawrence approaches this carefully. She starts by emphasizing she wants to be sensitive to other actors' experiences, acknowledging publicly that O. Russell can be really hard on people.
That shows the complexity of the relationship. It worked for her style, but she knows his intense method isn't universally effective or, frankly, pleasant.
Right. But for her, his style was immediately recognizable and effective because she grew up playing sports. She viewed him as a stern coach. She quotes his direct feedback. Do it louder. Do it more quiet. That was bullshit. Do it again.
It was straightforward, demanding, and focused entirely on the execution of the physical task, which she appreciated.
And she credits him with effectively teaching her how to act, especially since she never took formal lessons. He taught her the crucial value of staying loose rather than rigid over-preparation.
Mm.
For her natural, intuitive style, she learned that sometimes the need is just to be present and responsive, and that level of freedom was okay.
It sounds like he gave her permission to trust her instincts and respond organically in the moment, rather than forcing her into a highly methodical, textbook approach that might have just choked her natural talent.
Exactly. For a young, intuitive actress, receiving that kind of validation and structure from a demanding director is career-defining. But even with that freedom, both actors shared moments of profound professional humiliation that stick with them years later.
The first example is the infamous sports stats incident from Silver Linings Playbook. Lawrence recounts having to memorize these deeply non sequitur lines for a high-pressure scene with Robert De Niro.
The task itself was almost designed to induce anxiety, yelling nothing but random sports statistics with no train of thought to follow or emotional arc to anchor the memorization. Add to that the immense pressure of not wanting to waste a single second of Robert De Niro's time.
The outcome is a perfect psychological demonstration of performance anxiety. She nailed the impossible task perfectly on the very first take, only to have her confidence completely shatter. She then fucked up every single other take until they simply had to move on, leaving her hanging in that moment of failure. That is just brutal, but utterly relatable.
Oh, totally. And DiCaprio shares a similar, highly emotional moment of humiliation while filming The Aviator. He describes the feeling of completely freezing up and being unable to say his lines about the spruce goose. He captures the feeling perfectly, describing it as going to school with your underwear on, a deeply vulnerable and exposed professional failure in front of a massive waiting crew.
And finally, the ultimate high-stakes failure, tying together chaos and performance, the pharmaceutical hurdle during Red Sparrow. Lawrence details accidentally taking an Adderall instead of a sleeping pill before a high-pressure day.
Oh my God. She describes the ensuing night as completely sleepless, followed by the specific requirement of going to set the next morning and having to say Senate Armed Services Committee in a complex Russian accent.
She calls the entire experience hell.
I believe it. That specific detail, the multisyllabic political committee name combined with a difficult accent, is hilarious in its specificity, but it underscores the professional fragility. The moment she tries to say the line again, just to recount the story to DiCaprio, she immediately loses it, proving how easily that memory and performance ability can be disrupted under pressure.
Especially when you're sleep-deprived and pharmaceutically imbalanced.
It just confirms that even at the highest levels, actors are constantly battling external and internal forces, including their own chemistry and a severe lack of sleep. They are human, and they make simple, critical mistakes.
Which, of course, leads us to yet another famous pharmaceutical anecdote, the infamous Ambien mistake that happened on the set of the second Hunger Games movie.
Right, she recounts taking an Ambien in the morning, thinking it was something else entirely.
And this happened during a critical dance scene with the late Philip Seymour Hoffman.
The consequence, she explains, was that she was hallucinating. And critically, the Ambien completely shut off the memorization and logic processing part of her brain. The result was total professional chaos. She kept confusing the director with the most profound existential questions, repeatedly interrupting the flow of the scene.
Wait, and what does this mean? Wait, and what does this mean? She recounts the seriously annoyed Elizabeth Banks, who eventually threw her sides down in frustration.
The absurdity of a massive studio franchise being stalled by one of its lead stars, hallucinating and asking existential questions, is both alarming and incredibly funny. It just demonstrates that the chaotic, messy, and sometimes unprofessional process underpins even the most polished studio product.
Absolutely. Okay, let's pivot now to their formative Hollywood origin stories and more historical on-set chaos, because they both started remarkably young, driven by completely different forces.
They did. Lawrence started auditioning at 14 in New York, and DiCaprio started even earlier at 12, and both spent time navigating the highly competitive and often strange world of 1990s and early 2000s sitcoms and commercials.
DiCaprio was famously on Growing Pains for 1 year, a show Lawrence admits she watched every day after school. But the most interesting detail that changed the course of his career is the rare act of grace he received from that cast and crew.
He reveals that he was released early from his contract to go do the film This Boy's Life, thanks to Alan Thicke and others who recognized his potential and said, let the kid go do this.
Yeah.
That is a massive act of professional generosity, allowing a young talent to jump from the stability of a sitcom to serious, dramatic cinema.
And Lawrence's sitcom experience was far less heralded. She was on the Billing Bull show for 2 years, which she jokes nobody has ever seen, and which, in a bit of perfect career timing, got canceled right after she wrapped her breakthrough film, Winter's Bone.
And when discussing motivations, we see a clear contrast in their drive. DiCaprio reveals that his initial propulsion was deeply pragmatic, fueled by a desire to get out of my neighborhood. He saw acting primarily as a way to raise a college fund.
And he was the ultimate self-starter. He describes himself as the stage mom, pushing his parents to take him to auditions. He recounts planning routes home from school specifically to incorporate audition stops, which demonstrates a level of intense, focused ambition far beyond his years.
His first commercial was for a Matchbox car where he played a tiny gangster with slicked back hair and a briefcase. He also did a lot of DARE-like after-school specials, the kind that taught kids about the dangers of drugs.
Which is ironically fitting given the later anecdotes we've covered.
It really is.
And Lawrence's first gig was much more of an exercise in acting like someone else. Her first promo was for MTV's My Super Sweet 16. She was playing a rich, spoiled girl, which she had to act like because, as she jokes, she definitely didn't grow up rich. It was pure performance, faking the privileged life.
Okay, we need to cap off this section about Hollywood chaos with the undisputed legend, the infamous Titanic dosing incident.
The clam chowder!
The clam chowder. DiCaprio recounts the story he heard. He notes he wasn't personally present on the set at that exact moment, but the details are just astounding. This is one of the all-time great, unbelievable Hollywood urban legends, confirmed by the sources.
The sheer scale is staggering. 100 people went to the hospital after getting dosed with peyote or PCP, which someone had laced into the clam chowder on set.
The resulting chaos sounds cinematic itself. He describes a conga line forming on the soundstage, with crew members breaking into impromptu dancing when they were supposed to be working. The entire production ground to a halt due to mass hallucination.
And Lawrence, upon hearing the details, poses the perfect two-part question, demonstrating that pragmatic, anti-wasting resources mindset.
Why did somebody dose everyone, and why would they waste drugs?
It's a question that perfectly encapsulates the difference between rational thought and psychedelic chaos.
It truly is a moment where reality far exceeds anything fiction could invent. Moving from past chaos to future goals, Lawrence asked DiCaprio about his current white whales directors he desperately wants to work with, much like Paul Thomas Anderson had been his long-term goal.
And he reflects on PTA, noting he almost did Boogie Nights, but it overlapped with Titanic, forcing him to make a choice. He always felt PTA was a generational visionary he looked up to, watching his entire career progress while waiting for the right moment.
His current list of desired collaborators includes Damien Chazelle and Michael Mann. This is a fascinating list that suggests he's drawn to directors who blend formal, technical control with either intense, emotional, or detailed historical narratives. Chazelle's precision, Mann's realism and scope.
Finally, Lawrence asks for the ultimate advice before she works with Scorsese for the very first time. DiCaprio, a frequent Scorsese collaborator, gives her specific, practical tips that reveal the director's methodology.
And the most immediate, practical advice is classic Scorsese. He gives references in the form of DVDs, so Lawrence needs to immediately get a DVD player. This shows Scorsese's old-school analog approach, relying on physical media to share his deep cinematic vision and tone.
He also explains that Scorsese doesn't just reference short clips. He hosts screenings of entire feature films just to capture the tone, lighting, or pacing for one specific sequence in their current project. For example, he might screen a set of Japanese ghost films entirely for reference on how to block one particular scene.
It's not just about watching a movie, it's about absorbing an aesthetic sensibility. This level of comprehensive immersion requires the actors and crew to be cinematic historians as well as performers.
So if we connect all these strands together, the technical demands of VistaVision, the improvisational chaos of Benicio del Toro, the psychological impact of ambient and sports stats, and the historical references demanded by Scorsese, what stands out is the profound contrast between the public, polished image of these highly successful actors and the messy, often chaotic, and deeply vulnerable reality of their creative process.
They are battling everything, from ambient mix-ups and impossible line memorization to having to improvise entire narratives with collaborators who fundamentally change the whole movie on the fly. It is not a smooth, calculated corporate process. It is constantly demanding, often humiliating, and relies heavily on instinct and, frankly, luck.
The key takeaways for us, having gone through this deep dive, are clear. First, the finest comedic performances, like DiCaprio's failed revolutionary Bob, can emerge from intentional incompetence and absolute, committed seriousness, that essential Alec Baldwin principle.
Second, adapting complex internal emotional states, like the depression and postpartum isolation in Die My Love, often requires abandoning literal storytelling for abstract or poetic directorial styles, championed by people like Lynn Ramsey, who force the actor to simply exist.
And third, even megastars rely heavily on strong personal direction, whether it's the specific counterculture history note from PTA to make Bob a regional California guy, or the stern coach-like feedback from David O. Russell teaching an untrained actor how to stay loose and trust their gut.
This entire deep dive reveals that authenticity, The messy, unglamorous truth about making art is often what resonates most, both in their character choices, like Bob's anti-heroic failure, and in the transparent stories they choose to share about their lives.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. In an era of highly polished celebrity where every star seems carefully curated, does the willingness of artists like Lawrence and DiCaprio to reveal their creative chaos, the ambient mix-ups and the clam chowder dosing, ultimately make their polished final product more valuable and resonant to us? Something to think about the next time you watch a cinematic masterpiece and wonder just what went into the making of it.